How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Thursday, Yom Hamishi. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? Yehud in South Carolina, Sharon in New Jersey, Guy in Ohio, Melissa in Great Neck, Joe in the Inland Empire, Sharon in Shandora in the Bronx, Jonathan in Tucson, Bella in Florida, Tom in PA, Paul in the Great Northwest, Lorraine in Texas, Lucy in Minnesota, Chaim in Florida, Ella, Aoife in Florida. Welcome, everybody. Happy Elul. I will attempt the shofar. This is my old shofar. It is definitely not as good as the new one, which is just not available at this moment. And, you know, maybe somebody can advise me on this. As I've gotten older, I find that I've some dry mouth issues, and it's kind of just annoying, but whatever. But this year, when I come around to blow the shofar, it's much more difficult, I think, because I'm like a little bit, I don't know, I just feel like my mouth is more dry than it should be. So let's see what we could do. Let's go. Oh boy. I used to blow this one all the time. There was a little problem with the end, but let's go. Come on, Sal. It's also, I'm producing a higher pitch tone than used to. I really think that this dryness in my mouth is interfering with my shofar blowing. Please, God, help me to blow the shofar properly and let me not blow that old one anymore. Okay. Tom says, see what happens when you miss the dress rehearsal? Just so. Our daf today is page 74 here in Tractate Bava Basra, the 23rd volume of the Talmud, continuing our discussion of Mishna number 1 here in chapter 5. The colorful passages continue that we began yesterday. We started by talking about one who sells a ship. So what is included when one sells a ship? It's very hot in here. What is included when one sells a ship. And from there, we went on to these stories that are seemingly hyperbolic, insane, crazy things seen by the sages or reported to the sages at sea. But one interpretation is that, yeah, things happen and they saw things that, you know, in a world maybe that don't exist anymore, or they were given access to that upper world, that spiritual world where such things do exist and can be seen, or these are parables, and that all these giant forces, as it were, represent forces that truly are giant and dangerous in our world, right? So these are sort of physical expressions on a parable level of real forces that endanger all of us. So let's keep that in mind as we continue. We got a head start on page 74a yesterday, so we're actually near the bottom of 74a. Rabbi Yochanan relates, once we were traveling on a ship, and we saw a certain fish that took its head out of the sea, and its eyes had the appearance of 2 moons, and water scattered from its 2 gills like the 2 rivers of Surah. In other words, this fish was so giant that as it kind of crested out of the sea and back, and water streamed out of its gills, it was such a quantity of water that it was like a river, 2 rivers. Now Rav Safra relates, once we were traveling on a ship, and we saw a certain fish that took its head out of the sea, and it had horns. And the following was inscribed on its horns, I am a lowly creature of the sea, and I am 300 parasangs long. which is to say 1,200 kilometers. It's even bigger than the worms on Dune. That makes sense for anyone who's read those books. I am a lowly creature of the sea, and I am 300 parasangs long, and I am going into the mouth of the leviathan. In other words, I'm unimaginably huge, but the leviathan dwarfs me. So Rav Ashi said, this creature is the goat of the sea, which searches through the sea and has horns. Rabbi Yochanan relates, once we were traveling on a ship and we saw a certain crate in which precious stones and pearls were set, like a treasure. The crate seemed like it contained a treasure, and a species of fish called sharks encircled it. And he descended, meaning a diver from the boat descended, into the water to bring up this chest, because it seemed to had contained treasure. And the fish, meaning the sharks, became angry and sought to sever the diver's thigh. But the diver threw open a flask of vinegar, and then the sharks descended and swam away. And a divine voice emerged and said to us, "What right do you have to touch the crate of the wife of Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, as she is destined to insert sky blue wool, the techelis in our tzitzis, into it to be used in the ritual fringes of the righteous in the world to come." So very interesting ideas here. Here was, aside from the fact that this treasure, was found and then became unobtainable while they were in the water, and this idea that techelis, of all the dyes, sort of in the ancient world, right, purple dye was very valuable and only royalty could afford it. Techelis was sort of on a level with that, but it wasn't confined to the royalty. All Jewish men needed to have it in their tzitzis, even though it was so rare, so incredibly valuable thing. And so interesting, this idea that in the world to come, the righteous will need tzitzis, right? So even when we're in the world to come can refer either to the world of souls, which is that spiritual world, and you would think, do we really wear tzitzis in the spiritual world? Or what does it mean there? Maybe it's a kind of the form of tzitzis without the actual substance of it. Right? In other words, in the spiritual world, ideas, take shape and become things and unbecome things. We don't really understand the spiritual world at all, but we are led to believe that it is beyond physicality. And yet, so, you could take any form you want, and yet it seems that people will have the form of people, and perhaps they will wear the form of clothes and need the form of tzitzis on their corners. Or the world to come could refer to the resurrection of the dead at the time of Mashiach, when the Messiah comes. So the dead will be resurrected in this world, right? So the dead will return and occupy bodies that are reconstituted and given to them by God, and then they certainly would need their tzitzis. At any rate, this idea that Rabbi Hanina, the wife of Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, was involved in preparing the tzitzis speaks to two things. One is this great purity of soul. Two, that a woman can create tzitzis and tie them, although that's not according to all opinions. Only men wear them according to traditional law. And according to some opinions, only men should prepare them, but according to other traditional opinions, women may prepare tzitzis as well. And a third idea here is that Hanina ben Dosa and his family were very poor. And this idea of people who are crushed by poverty in this world, it's because they have a great advantage over us. Remember, this life, finite, right? Even if a person is so fortunate as to live 120 years, that's nothing alongside eternity. And the rewards of eternity are much greater and much longer lasting than the rewards in this world. So people who suffer in this world, they're saving all of their reward for the next world. And sometimes the righteous, it's almost like God forces them to suffer and live an impoverished life in this world so that they will merit to have all of their reward. None of their reward will be used up in this world. It's all preserved for them in the world to come. Now, here's an interesting name we haven't heard before. Rav Yehuda from India. Rav Yehuda from India relates, once we were traveling in a ship, and by the way, there is a Jewish community in India, and it used to be a bigger one, long time. I think they're called the B'nai Menashe. But for sure, there's been a Jewish community in India for many, many centuries. So this Rav Yehuda is from there. And so he says, once we were traveling in a ship, and we saw a certain precious stone that was encircled by a snake. And a diver descended to bring it up. And the snake came and sought to swallow our ship. And a raven came and cut off its head, and the water turned into blood due to the enormousness of the snake. And then another snake came and took the precious stone and hung it on the dead snake, and it recovered. And it returned and again sought to swallow the ship. And yet again a bird came and cut off its head and took that precious stone and threw it into the ship. And we had with us these salted birds, and we placed the stone on them, and they took the stone and flew away with it. Now, all of these stories can exist as parables and suggest other meanings, but let's just look at this one. The note from Rav Steinsaltz goes like this. Some commentaries explain that this precious stone symbolizes wisdom, which can be acquired only through great exertion and effort. Now, the snake that encircles wisdom, represents the spiritual pitfalls that lie in the path of wisdom, which must be removed before one can hope to become wise. Now, this idea of spiritual pitfalls that become obstacles to wisdom, I find very interesting, because it just really shows how distinct wisdom is from knowledge. Right? A person can acquire tremendous knowledge and be spiritually short, right? You can be a giant of knowledge and spiritually remain a child. I'm sure we can all think of people like that. On the other hand, to grow in wisdom, one must also grow in service of God, in kindness to others, in attentiveness. All these other qualities have to travel along with knowledge in order for a person to be considered wise. And so the pitfalls on our journeys to wisdom, that even if we're doing well and we have, repaired some of our flaws and we've become kinder and gentler, more giving, more learned in Torah and Talmud, etc., growing in many different ways, nonetheless, spiritual pitfalls are always before us. And we can slip and we can fall and we can give into ego and into rage and into all kinds of problems. And then our wisdom will be curtailed. It could even be lost. Right? So this idea, no matter how attained you are in wisdom, the danger is everywhere and you could lose it. And the battle for wisdom is a spiritual battle. And so Rav Steinsaltz continues, citing the Ritva, that once one successfully does so, becomes wiser, wisdom then becomes like an elixir of life for him. And he understands the value of wisdom in his life, and he seeks more of it. Alternatively, the precious stone alludes to the Torah, and the snake represents the wicked empires that prevent the Jewish people from engaging in its study. And the salted birds are Torah scholars who suffer under the foreign rulers, and nevertheless they are still preserved, and they fly away to other countries to escape during difficult times, not only to save their hide, as it were, but to preserve Torah. And we've seen in various times and places when the enemies of the Jews tried to kill the Torah tradition because they understood how much that tradition sustains the Jewish people. New subject. Apropos the stories of large sea creatures, the Gemara discusses the large sea creatures mentioned in the Bible. So the sages taught there was an incident involving Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua, who were traveling on a ship. And Rabbi Eliezer was sleeping, and Rabbi Yehoshua was awake. Rabbi Yehoshua trembled, and Rabbi Eliezer woke up. So Rabbi Eliezer said to him, "What is this, Yehoshua? For what reason did you tremble?" And Rabbi Yehoshua said to him, "I saw a great light in the sea." And Eliezer said to him, "Perhaps you saw the eyes of the leviathan. As it is written, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the morning." That's Job 41:10. Rav Ashi said that Ahuna Bar Nassan said to me, once we were traveling in the desert, and we had a thigh of meat with us. We cut open the thigh and tore off the sciatic nerve and the forbidden fat, and we put it on the grass. And by the time that we brought wood, the thigh had repaired itself, and we roasted it. And when we returned to that place after 12 months of the year had passed, we saw that those coals were still glowing. And when I came before a Maimar, he said to me that grass was a drug of life, an elixir of life, while those coals were of broom, which is a kind of tree whose coals last much longer than regular wood. And the verse states, Genesis 1:21, that God created the great sea monsters. So here in Bava, they interpreted this as a reference to the sea oryx. And Rabbi Yochanan says, this is Leviathan, the slant serpent, and Leviathan, the tortuous serpent. Two different kinds of Leviathan. As it is stated, Isaiah 27:1, in that day the Lord with his sore and great and strong sword will punish Leviathan, the slant serpent, and Leviathan, the tortuous serpent, in which the commentators interpret as there were two different Leviathans. One was already killed, and the other will be killed when Mashiach comes. Now the Gemara provides a mnemonic for the following statements of Rav Yehuda. So in Hebrew, this siman is kol sha'a yarden, everything, kol, sha'a, time, like a moment in time, and yarden, the Jordan River. So everything, time, Jordan. And this is to help us remember the three teachings that follow. So Rav Yehuda says that Rav says, everything that the Holy One, blessed be He, created in His world, He created male and female, even Leviathan, the slant serpent, and Leviathan, the tortuous serpent, He created male and female. And if they would have coupled and produced offspring, they would have destroyed the entire world. So what did the Holy One, blessed be He, do? He castrated the male and killed the female, and salted the female to preserve it for the banquet of the righteous in the future. As it is stated, and He will slay the serpent that is in the sea. Right? We're not talking about whales, not even blue whales, we're not talking about beautiful, natural creatures. We're talking about some kind of a creature that is so dangerous that it actually threatened life on Earth. It's not a creature that we've ever, learned about or experienced other than in the pages of the Bible. And He, God, created even the beasts on the 1,000 hills. See Psalm 50. He created them male and female. And they were so enormous that if they would have coupled and produced offspring, they would have destroyed the entire world. So what did the Holy One, blessed be He, do? He castrated the male and cooled the sexual desire of the female and preserved it for the righteous in the future. As it is stated about the beasts, lo now, his strength is in his loins, Job 40:16. And this is referring to the male, and the continuation of that verse, and his force is in the stays of his body. This is the female, alluding to the idea that they did not use their genitals for the purpose of procreation. So the Gemara asks, well, there too, with regard to the Leviathan, let him castrate the male and cool the female. Why was it necessary to kill the female and preserve, that corpse and its skin as some kind of a banquet for the righteous in the future? And the Gemara answers, fish are unrestrained, and therefore, even if the female was cooled, the female would still procreate. And the Gemara suggests, and let him do the opposite, and kill and preserve the male leviathan. And the Gemara responds, if you wish, say that the salted female is better. If you wish, say instead that since it is written, there is leviathan whom you have formed to sport with, in Psalm 104, the male must be left alive for sport, because it is not proper conduct to sport with a female. And the Gemara asks here too, with regard to the beasts, let him preserve the female in salt instead of cooling it. And the Gemara answers, salted fish is good, but salted meat is not good. And Rav Yehuda says that Rav says, at the time when the Holy One, blessed be He, sought to create the world, He said to the minister of the sea, we'll come back to that in a minute, open your mouth and swallow all the waters of the world, so that there will be room for land. And the minister of the sea said before him, Master of the universe, it is enough that I will stay within my own waters. And God immediately struck him and killed him. As it is stated, he stirs up the sea with his power, and by his understanding he smites through Rahab. That's Job 26:12. So who is the minister of the sea? Rav Steinsaltz has a note here. It makes sense to me. This idea that the minister of the sea represents nature. In other words, it's the way of the water, the way of the ocean. The way of the ocean is to be the ocean. Right? The ocean doesn't recede. The ocean would just expand if it could. When it comes up on land, okay, then it cannot go any further, but it will just do its thing. Right? So if there was a time, and the Bible tells us that originally, right, it was all water, and there was no land anywhere. So if we needed the sea to recede from the land, that's not something that the sea would do of its own volition. But God is beyond nature. God formed nature. God is above nature. If God wants to change nature, God will change nature. There's no limit to what God can do, particularly in a world that was created and continuously sustained by God. There's only one power in the world, and that is God. So God will do what God wants, right? And that's really what we're learning here. Okay. Rabbi Yitzchak said, conclude from here that the name of the minister of the sea is Rahab, and were it not for waters of the sea that cover him, no creature could withstand his smell, as his corpse emits a terrible stench. As it is stated, they shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Isaiah 11:9. And do not read this phrase as cover the sea, rather read it as cover the minister of the sea, i.e. the term sea is referring to the minister of the sea, not the sea itself. And Rav Yehuda says that Rav says the Jordan issues forth from the cave of Pamias. And that is also taught in a Baraisa. The Jordan issues forth from the cave of Pamias and travels in the Sea of Sifki, i.e. the Hula Lake, and in the Sea of Tiberia, i.e. the Sea of Tiberias, and the Sea of Galilee, and it rolls down to the Great Sea, and rolls down until it reaches the mouth of the Leviathan. As it is stated, he is confident, though the Jordan rush forth to his mouth. So Rava Bar Ula strongly objects to this explanation of the verse, stating, but this verse is written about the beasts on the 1,000 hills. So rather, Rava Bar Ula says that this is the meaning of the verse. When are the beasts on the 1,000 hills confident? When the Jordan rushes forth into the mouth of the Leviathan. Very difficult esoteric passages to understand. But I would just suggest, again, Sal, pure Sal, no source for this, just me speculating. But I like this idea that, God created the world. And so when God created the world, he decided what would be in it and what would not be in it. And he did a fabulous job creating the world. Incredible, incredible universe that God created. But when he created it, right, in the beginning, there were only two people and then, many more, right? God also created a past. We have no idea when God created the universe. He could have created an ancient universe with its own, sort of inherent history built into it that could be billions of years old. There's no reason why God couldn't do that. But at any rate, whenever God created the world and however many people were in it, over time, we've had many human beings. And as far as we know, it's only the humans, at least on Earth, who have consciousness and sentience and, capacity for philosophy, belief, analysis, inspection, introspection. And so, as more and more humans have lived in the world and participated in the world and looked at the world and accepted the world as it is, or sought to make small changes in it, but at any rate, as they gazed on the world and within the world became more real, more firm, less malleable, right? So now, for some supernatural thing to happen, for somebody to, desire to make a supernatural change in the world, he's dealing with a world that so many billions of people before him or her have accepted as it is. It's very hard to make any kind of change. But when the world was younger, I think it was a little bit less removed from its spiritual and more malleable state. And so maybe all of this stuff that we're reading here is exactly what happened and exactly what they saw. But, then over time it was seen by fewer and fewer people, and it just became more and more hidden. And all the rational beliefs about the world just really took over, and kind of extreme events became fewer. Something to think about. Now, the Gemara provides a mnemonic for the upcoming statements of Rav Dimi. Sees Gavriel hungry. When Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, he said that Rabbi Yochanan said, "What is the meaning of that which is written?" Quote, "For he has founded it upon the seas and established it upon the floods," from Psalm 24. These are the 7 seas and the 4 rivers that surround Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. And these are the 7 seas: the Sea of Tiberias, the Sea of Sodom, which is the Dead Sea, the Sea of Chelat, the Sea of Chelata, the Sea of Sifki, the Sea of Aspamia, and the Great Sea, which is the Mediterranean. And these are the 4 rivers: the Jordan, the Jarmuth, the Keromion, and the Piga, which are the rivers of Damascus. So when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, he said that Rabbi Yonasan says in the future, Gabriel is the angel Gabriel will perform a hunt of the leviathan. As it is stated, "Can you draw out leviathan with a fish hook, or press down his tongue with a cord?" from Job 40 verse 25. And were the Holy One, blessed be he, not assisting Gabriel, he would not be able to hunt it. As it is stated, only he who made him can use his sword to approach him. Right? Some kind of unimaginable force, not some kind of fleshy fish or mammal or animal of the sea, but some much, much larger spiritual leviathan. We're on page 75a, getting a little bit of a head start on this page, but I'm close to done. Questions or comments, please get them in. When Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, he said that Rabbi Yochanan said, when the Leviathan is hungry, he produces breath from his mouth and thereby boils all the waters in the depths of the sea. As it is stated, he makes the deep boil like a pot. And if the Leviathan did not place its head in the Garden of Eden, no creature could withstand his foul smell. As it is stated, he makes the sea like a seething mixture, merkacha. Job 41:23. And the term merkacha is also used to describe something with a smell. And when he is thirsty, Leviathan, he makes many furrows in the sea. As it is stated, he makes a path to shine after them. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov says, after the Leviathan drinks from the sea, the depth of the sea does not return to its normal condition until 70 years have passed. As it is stated, one would think the deep to be hoary, and hoary indicates a person who is no less than 70 years old. And Rabbah says that Rabbi Yochanan says, in the future, the Holy One, blessed be He, will make a feast for the righteous from the flesh of the leviathan, as it is stated, the chaverim, right, the righteous ones who are in friendship, the chaverim, will make a feast of him, Job 40:30. And kara means nothing other than a feast, as it is stated, and he prepared, vayikra, for them a great feast, kara. And they ate and drank, from 2 Kings 6:23. And chaverim means nothing other than Torah scholars. As it is stated, you dwell in the gardens, the companions, the chaverim, hearken for your voice, cause me to hear it, from Song of Songs. And this verse is interpreted as referring to Torah scholars who listen to God's voice. And with regard to the remainder of the Leviathan, they will divide it and use it for commerce in the markets of Jerusalem. As it is stated, they will part him among the Canaanim. And the Canaanim means nothing other than merchants. As it is stated, quote, as for the merchant, Canaan, the balances of deceit are in his hand. He loves to oppress, from Hosea 12:8. And if you wish, say that the proof is from here, whose merchants are princes, whose traffickers are the honorable of the earth. That's where we'll stop for today. But this idea that, spiritually speaking, Leviathan represents this massive, unconquerable, untamable, unstoppable, wild force that often results in danger, evil, death, wickedness, blasphemy, war, etc., and it's just beyond any human capacity to tame such a force. It's necessary, right? God decreed that this Leviathan, kind of underpinning our world and sending all, these kinds of challenging, dark energies into the world. It will continue until Mashiach comes, until we enter the Messianic age. And at that point, the Leviathan will be slaughtered, and this world then will understand how much of an effect Leviathan had in our world. But we won't know until then, when it is slaughtered. Okay, that's what I have for us today. And let me see if I've got some questions on Bava Basra 74. Jonathan, regarding the world to come in tzitzis, interesting that it uses alma-dati rather than olam haba. In modern Hebrew, it reminds me of the word dati for religious, so maybe this is a specific usage and reason for tzitzis. Agreed. Sharon, traditionally in Europe, the mother or grandmothers of sons made the talit katan for their young sons, on the subject of women making the tzitzis, which they put on them on their third birthday when they get their first haircut and started their schooling. And this remains a tradition for many in Chabad. I was at the Ushperin, which is the haircut, the first haircut. Jewish boys, in Orthodox families and Hasidic families, there's no haircut until they're 3 years old. So very often these little boys look like girls because they have this beautiful long hair. And they get their first haircut when they're 3, and then they also get their first tzitzis, as Sharon is describing. And so I was at the Ushperin of the grandson of the head of the Chabad Rabbinical School in Morristown, New Jersey, where this was done. I have a lot of friends who've been to that yeshiva in Morristown. So thank you for sharing that. And Sharon, isn't the sukkah in the Messianic era to be made from the skin of the Leviathan? That is exactly where we're going to begin tomorrow. Just so. Jonathan, in the morning prayers, there's the verse that says, blessed are you, etc., that spread land over the water. To me, this means reduce chaos in the world. Water equals chaos, land equals safety and firmness. So maybe these sea creatures are really just the danger of chaos made manifest. And I think you probably wrote that before what I said at the end, because I think my thought at the end, very similar to what you're saying here. Yes. Tom, finally, there's evidence that cetaceans and elephants have a capacity for all that. For all what? For all what? But certainly, I mean, isn't it incredible that with all the science and scientific exploration that we've now had active, let's say since the 20th century, when so many species were discovered, right? I mean, all the history of humanity up until the 20th century did not enable us to discover, I think we knew of fewer species that have been discovered since. the scientific era began. I mean, just because, they really couldn't go underwater in ancient times. So the idea that we have submarines and scuba diving and, just all this life that was discovered in the sea when humans could go down there, when we've developed microscopes and we were able to see so much life on a much smaller scale, and there are many species that only exist at that scale. And even on land, there have been species that have been discovered in modern times. And I'm sure that there's many more that we haven't discovered yet. But it's one of the astounding claims for the authenticity of the Torah that it was written by God that we had in last week's Parsha, this idea that, fish, what is a kosher fish that one can eat? One that has fins and scales. Well, there's never been a fish with scales that doesn't have fins. So it would have been enough to say scales, right? Why does it also say fins? And this was, in a sense, to be one of those little, kisses in the Torah for people of faith that they could, that they can, help them pin their faith on it. That if the book was written by humans and not by God, what an astounding claim to make, that there will never be a fish that has scales and no fins, because if it did, this would somehow violate what's in the Torah. But it hasn't happened, and we believe with a perfect emunah that won't happen, right? Now, the sages were wrong about a lot of things in the sense that they didn't have access to astronomy and understand the motion of the stars, maybe in the same way that we do. And also in terms of anatomy and the workings of pharmaceuticals, etc. I mean, they didn't have the science for that, and they were making the best guesses that they could based on trial and error with sources in Torah. But the Torah, what has been disproven in the Torah? Nothing. Some people would say, oh, well, the creation story doesn't make sense. I would say it makes perfect sense, and anyone who would like to see the Torah, the 6 days of creation, reconciled with high math, proper, cosmology, and Big Bang physics, highly recommend Jerry Schroeder's book, Genesis and the Big Bang. That's what I've got for us today, and with God's help, see you tomorrow, Friday, at the regular Friday time, noon Pacific.